All right, Mr. Campbell. What year were you born in?
1922
And where was that located
in
at?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania? What do you remember when you first heard about the war?
Which war are we talking about?
World War II, sorry.
Okay. I was in the service when America joined the war.
You were already in the service?
I could see the war coming.
So does that mean you enlisted or?
I enlisted.
You enlisted? What made you want to enlist?
Now, first of all, I was born and raised on a poor man's farm. And I had two futures, staying on the farm, which wasn't interested in me, or to get out of the farm. And the quickest way I could think of was I could see a war coming on. The draft hadn't started yet, so I was going to get in on the ground floor rather than wait to be caught up in
Yeah.
events.
What was basic training like for you?
Well, you knew how to learn how to make a bed and bounce the quarter off of the cover. You learned how to keep a footlocker organized and pass inspections. And you learned how to drill,
Okay.
which your right foot from your left foot and all that. When I was in there, I also found a lot of imaginary things that you could do that normally you wouldn't expect, like going around and pick up trash wherever trash existed and so forth.
Where was this basic training?
In Langley Field, Virginia. And I had anticipated that I would be a radio operator on an airplane. But when I got to Langley Field, because I didn't have a college education, I graduated from high school in 1940 and joined the Army Air Corps. And I got to seeing these second lieutenants driving around in convertibles with pretty girls sitting and wings on their tunics. So, coincidentally, in 1941, you had to have a college education to become a pilot. In 1941, they discovered they weren't going to get enough college graduates to meet the demand. So if you had 2 years of, you had a high school graduate, you had passed physical and mental exams, and you were between 18 and 21, you could become an enlisted pilot. So I applied for that and became an enlisted pilot. There were only 2,500 of us that did that. And then by that time we had some combat, and officer pilots got special treatment and enlisted pilots didn't. So they made us all officers.
What rank were you?
I started out as a flight officer, which is the equivalent of a warrant officer in the Army, a flight officer in the Air Force.
And what rank did you end up being by the end of your service?
I got a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. And then I got applied for and was accepted as a second lieutenant in the regular U.S. Army Air Corps following World War II. And then I hung on and graduated, finished after 30 years as a lieutenant colonel.
Did you receive any medals or special accommodations for your
Yes.
service?
I got the Distinguished Flying Cross, got 11 air medals, and the Meritorious Service Medal.
It's really nice.
I flew 61 missions in the Mediterranean theater, mostly out of North Africa.
What planes did you end up flying during your service?
Well, I flew my combat missions in a P-40. I don't know whether you know what a P-40 is or not.
Oh no, there were so many.
And after I served my combat tour, I came back and started teaching American pilots in P-47 Thunderbolts. And then by that time we had Turkey and Mexico and Brazil thinking about joining the war. They sent pilots, and I trained Turkish, American, Mexican, and Brazilian pilots, combat tactics in P-47s, and later on in P-51s.
It says in my notes that you trained fighter pilots from 15 different countries.
That was after the war. This was during.
Oh, during the war.
This was during 49 to 53, the Cold War, the Korean War.
Yeah.
I trained pilots from all of the NATO countries in jet. And then when I come in the middle of all that, I got a unique assignment. I was transferred to the Royal Air Force and became the chief flying instructor for a Royal Air Force training base where they were converting wartime pilots, conventional engine, to jet pilots.
And the Royal Air Force would have been from England.
Yeah. And as a result of that, I went to the coronation of the Queen, and my wife and I were invited to Buckingham Palace for a garden party.
Nice. Have you met the Queen?
Yeah.
How was that like?
It was very mass produced, but at least I went through and shook hands and enjoyed the good. The only garden party of the year that wasn't rained out. The outside portion wasn't rained.
Now, whereabouts were you stationed?
In North Africa. In North Africa, I was one of the few pilots that took P-40s off of an aircraft carrier, and we went into North Africa. There's my squadron on the, and there's me on the USS Ranger. We took off from the USS Ranger and landed at Casablanca in Morocco.
So you were stationed on an aircraft carrier?
Just for 2 weeks,
Just for 2 weeks?
which was an exciting thing because the Navy sends their aircraft carriers out to sea, then they take the airplanes off and land on it. Well, you're not about to land one of those airplanes on an aircraft carrier. So what they
Imagine that'd be
did was
different.
we had to load up while they were still in port. We were at the Naval Air Base, and we had to taxi down through Newport, or Norfolk, Virginia, down through the streets of Norfolk, 75 of us.
What was it like living on that for 2 weeks?
It was great, except general quarters was practice. You're running around, put the lights out. The sailors knew how to duck all the overhead stuff, but we didn't.
Yeah, only being there for a short time,
Yeah.
I'd imagine it'd be hard.
Did you see any action? You said that you trained a lot of fire pilots, but did you see action in North Africa?
Yes, after 61 combat missions.
61 combat missions in North Africa, and that was Al Alamein.
No, this was Morocco, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. We're talking about Western North Africa.
Okay.
No, Monty had already driven the Germans west. In fact,
That battle was already over.
no, they were still marching. In fact, the headline news, Seuss, he used to strafe the airfield when the Germans had it at Seuss, which is in the headlines today because over the weekend 60 people were murdered by some jihadi.
Yeah.
Remember that I was flying a P-40, which is outmoded, against the Messerschmitt 109 and the Messerschmitt 170 and the Focke-Wulf 170. So the P-40s did not shoot down a lot of enemy aircraft, but we provided escort and protection for bombers, primarily. And that was always interesting. I did manage to shoot down two German airplanes. One was a Messerschmitt and one was a transport, a Messerschmitt transport airplane. But the rest of it was ground strafing and bomber protection.
And you did 60 missions in North Africa?
Mm-hmm.
Did you do any in Europe?
No. What happened was in end of September of 43, we were changing airplanes from the P-40, we were going to get the P-47, and there was going to be about a 6 week, nothing happening except learning to fly the new P-47. Those of us who had more than 50 missions had the option of staying and going on or coming home. I chose to come home. And then I sold war bonds for a couple months, and then I went out west, became technical advisor on the movie Winged Victory.
What year was this?
1944.
Wings of Victory? So you
Winged Victory.
A Winged Victory.
Gene Crane and Lon McAllister. It was just an interesting little sidelight.
So
But I did get to stay in the best hotel in Hollywood and have private transportation back and forth to work.
there couldn't have been very many GIs who were back from the war in 1943.
No.
There couldn't have been.
Now that everybody was going, I was coming.
Yeah.
I woke up having flown my 61 combat missions. I woke up in Norfolk, Virginia on my 21st birthday.
Jeez.
So, how did you end up becoming a fighter pilot trainer? Is that something you asked for,
Well,
or
I
they
was a
just told
fighter
you
pilot.
to do?
And of course, fighter pilots train fighter pilots, not bomber pilots, the other way around.
Yeah.
So I had a tour of the occupation. After we're talking about the war now, where I trained fighter pilots from the 4 different countries. And then when the war was over, I went to occupied Japan. When I came home from occupied Japan, when I started training all the NATO pilots as well as American pilots.
Are any of these fighter pilots that you trained, did they have any experience? Were you just making them better, or were they just completely new?
They were completely new,
And,
except one in the RAF where they were combat veterans in bombers or something like that, and they were converting to jets. And so there were combat experienced pilots there. But when we're talking about the U.S., they were all just out of flying school, just out of West Point, just out of basic flying school.
And what were the risks and dangers associated with training like brand new pilots?
Well, in those days, the biggest danger was from foreign pilots, because they're just you in the cockpit, and they're just him in the cockpit. And if they're not totally familiar, there's certain things you have to do when you're training, in addition to the fact that he wants to know how, because his life is involved in what he does. You would ask, we'd always have symbols, check your fuel. And an American pilot knew right where to look to see the fuel gauges. But the foreign pilot, and in the meantime, he's flying the airplane, but his head is down here, and you're flying on his wing, or he's flying on your wing. And so while he's busy looking for the gas gauge,
You had to watch what he was doing.
yeah, and sometimes it came very close.
So you guys had your own little special communication that you
Oh,
do
yeah.
up in there?
Did you ever have any close calls on your 60 missions in North Africa where you almost bit the dust?
Yes. I was one of the combats with a ME-109. He got a 20 millimeter shell, a 20 millimeter, I want to say shell, bullet. It was not a bullet, it was the object. It went through, the wing goes like this, and as it comes to the end of the wing, there's two layers right together. It went through the wing just about that far from the end of it. Made a hole about like that on the top side where it went in, and put about 25 or 30 little, like somebody had taken a knife and punched little holes in it. Totally nothing to worry about, but the worry was that it actually hit me. And on my last mission was over Sardinia. We flew a lot of missions over Sardinia and over Sicily, which means you had to fly across the Mediterranean.
Which is part of Italy?
Yeah. German occupied. On my last mission, I had a close by 88 millimeter anti-aircraft explosion. And the next thing I know, the elevator started flying, going like this. And the faster I flew, the worse it fluttered, and the slower I flew, the less it fluttered. Well, I couldn't keep up with the squadron, so I had to lag behind, and my wingmate, came up and volunteered to fly with me to protect me as we went back from Sardinia to North Africa. And again, it was a simple little thing on the elevators, which you use to bring the nose up or push the nose down. There was a little trim tab, which when you need a lot of nose up, you put the trim tab, and the trim tab pushes, the trim tab adjusts, which increases the pressure on the elevator that you don't have to do with the stick. Or to go down the same way. Well, when the trim tab is fluttering like that, your elevator is fluttering like that. And that's, after I got on the ground, that concussion from the explosion was just enough that something happened that the trim tab broke. And I didn't know it, but I'm sitting out there, what the heck happened in my last mission? And come home.
When did you get married?
1944.
So you got married before the end of the war, and you
Yes.
were at home for a year.
Yes.
And then you went, and then did you?
When I got married, we went to Abilene, Texas. That's where I trained the pilots in P-47s and P-51s for the rest of the war.
If you would you describe your daily duties as a fighter pilot trainer? Just said.
Well, there's the main duty, of course, was when we were at Abilene, Texas. I was probably flying at least 3 missions a day, and sometimes 4 missions a day. And this was in the height of summer. And the airplane was not air conditioned or anything. You flew with the canopy open. I remember putting a thermometer hanging out on the gun sight. It was registering 137 degrees.
Jesus.
You would take 3 wingmen, and you would go up and you would practice dive bombing. And we had a little container that would have 5-pound bombs with a marking smoke that you would drop, and they would have the same trajectory as an actual bomb. But we were not going to run around with 500-pound bombs practicing, so we had these little containers you would drop one bomb at a time, and it would hold 8 bombs. Well, you go up to 10,000 feet, you come down, you make a dive bomb and run, and you pull out at about 5 Gs, and you do that 8 times. For one flight of airplanes, come back, have a Coke, maybe a hamburger, take another flight out, do the same thing, and do that 3 or 4 times a day.
Now, if you had the choice, would you do it all over again?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
especially my RAF tour.
What was your favorite part about flying?
Well, when we got the jets.
Yeah. You like the jets better than the...
Oh yeah.
Yeah. How long did you end up using the jets?
The rest of my, except for the last 4 years, I became the U.S. Air Force air attaché to Pakistan. And we had a Convair C-131 VIP configured to carry the ambassador around, as well as to do Air Force intelligence.
When did the Air Force actually come to being? Because it really
1947.
47, because it really wasn't an Air Force during the
No, it was the Army Air Corps.
Yeah.
And then they renamed it the Army Air Force, and then it became the U.S. Air Force in 1947. But the neat thing about that one was I was the check pilot for all the air attachés in Afghanistan, Iran, India, and Burma. And that meant that once a year I either had to go to Afghanistan or Iran or someplace to check the pilot's ability to fly instruments, or they would come to Pakistan and I would do it there. And normally in a 3-year tour, you got to go back and forth at least once. And the good part about that is I could take my wife with me, and we would get to live with the air attaché in whatever country.
Oh, so you took your wife with you when you were flying?
Mm.
That's really nice.
Yeah. And we've only been married 71 years.
Jeez.
It's a long time.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other questions?